Hi everybody, I hope you are all well. Another week has gone by. It's gone by really quick, I have to say. It's been absolutely glorious weather here throughout the week, very warm, and it's quite warm right now, but it is cloudy and looking quite miserable outside. I've got the window open to get fresh air in here, so if you hear cars and planes and birds, it's because it's just right outside my window. So yes, because of the nice weather, it's meant obviously going for walks and after work and everything has been a lot nicer. But luckily on Friday I did finish work a little early and I had planned to read in the garden, but instead I changed my mind to read inside. Fell asleep because of the heat and woke up 2 hours later. It was really weird. I usually don't fall asleep like that, in the middle of the afternoon, but I think the heat must have just got to me. So luckily I wasn't out in the garden, else right now I'd be looking like a lobster, or because I tend to sleep on my side, to quote Close Encounter of the Third Kind, I would be looking like a 50-50 bar right now. Luckily I am not. But anyway, I'm here to talk about the book I've been reading this week, which is The Ickabog by J.K. Rowling. Now, in case you aren't aware, when the UK went into the first lockdown of 2020 because of COVID, which was March last year, J.K. Rowling was basically having a bit of a clear out, as it were. She had written the Ickabog, or started the Ickabog, as she was writing the Harry Potter books. She told the story to her kids who really loved it, but never finished it. It got shoved up in the attic and left there. And then during lockdown, she was going through her stuff and came across it. And she decided that since there was a lot of terrible stuff going on with COVID in the world and kids weren't able to go to school and such, she wanted to give something back, help the kids in lockdown. So she decided that on her website she would publish, it was either every day or every few days, she would publish a chapter or two of this story called The Ickabog, and she finished writing it. She uploaded it. It was really popular and children started sending artwork relating to the story. And it was decided that this book was going to be published. JK put out a competition for those who had submitted art and anybody else who wanted to submit art to do so. And if their pictures were picked, they would appear in the published book. So it is the children's story, for those who did the artwork, as well as JK's writing, which I think was just absolutely lovely to do. So this got published in, I think it was October, so it was September, October last year, obviously for the build up for Christmas. I didn't read it. I had other things on my mind. I was trying to distract myself other ways. The Ickabog just didn't appeal to me. But I thought, right, when I was doing my Amazon wish list, I thought, after it had been published, I thought, you know what? I'm in a different mindset now than I was when this first got published on her website. Let's give it a go. So I got it, and here I am reviewing it. So I got through, by yesterday morning, I've gotten through about a third of it, because, as I said, I'm enjoying being outside and such. Or I was falling asleep because of the heat. I had other things kind of distracting me, so I thought, right, yesterday I'm just going to sit and I'm going to read the bulk load of it and finish it today. I actually ended up finishing it yesterday. So I got through like 200 pages yesterday, which was great. So in case you don't know what it's about, Ickabog is set in this country where it's not in our world. It's a fairy story entirely, and it's set in this world called Cornucopia, the city of which is called Shoeville. Shoe is in the pastry. They're absolutely obsessed with pastries in Shoeville. They make the best pastries anyone could ever imagine. And there lives two friends, Daisy Dovetail and Bert Beamish. So and they grown up together, they're really good friends, and their parents work for the king, so they get to like hang out in like the royal courtyards and all this lot. And the king is called Fred, and he is he's kind of, his reputation is that he's this fierce warrior and everything, but in reality he's not really. He's, you know, he has flaws that people can't really see. And one day, a man comes to see the king, because he has these sessions where anybody can come to the king to talk to him once a month. And guy comes to me, so I'm from the outer marshlands, and I've seen an Ickabog, and it's killed my dog. And an Ickabog is this like mythical, legendary creature that is always seen as a threat, but nobody's seen one, because it's a mythical creature. Like, oh, that was years, hundreds of years ago, you know, whatever. But nobody's seen one, and this kind of starts to creep into the minds of people in Shoeville and the rest of Cornucopia, to the point that advisors to the king start to see a possible benefit to this. And this then leads to a series of events that ricochet through, it covers several years, this book, to see what impacts this threat, which may not even exist, could be to the people, and how that would benefit them. So a lot of stuff happens in this book. It spans several years, as I said, and I found it an absolute joy to read, I have to say. Now, one thing I really have to make clear here, you know, I love JK. You know, if you've seen my others, I love her books. They're absolutely brilliant. This is a children's book. This is a children's book that is not Harry Potter. And by my emphasizing, I'm not saying, oh, you know, to do with the world and everything. It's not even, it feels like it's written for an age group younger than Harry Potter. She doesn't spend time, for example, like, you know, you get to know the characters, you get to know their attitudes and the way that they interact with each other, all this lot. She doesn't have time for that. She gives you descriptions, she doesn't necessarily give you a lot of a speech from the characters, because this is a fairy story. It's written in a fairy story. Once upon a time, in a, you know, in a far off land, there was a king called Fred, you know, that kind of language. So it's very, very different even from Harry Potter, you know, but her other children's novels are obviously extremely different than her adult novels. So as an adult looking at this, I was like, oh, I'd really like her to expand more on that character. I'd really like her to expand more on that conversation, but that wasn't going to happen. I knew that wasn't going to happen. So it's just like, okay, that's the way it is. I wasn't upset by it, of course not. This is a children's novel. It's for an age group that I am not in. So yeah, but as an overall story, I found it absolutely enchanting. And what I absolutely love is that JK has written something once again which shows darkness to children. She's written about, in this book, corruption, murder, politics, child abuse, manipulation, body shaming, fat shaming of children. There's a whole range of stuff, and at the end of the day, she tells you basically about the power of words, and it's so interesting. Racism is a thing here. But when you read the Ickabog, as the story progresses, especially the end, you'll understand how that relates to this story. But what I absolutely love, especially, are the drawings. I love seeing how children who have read this story have interpreted her world, her words, and never does she describe people's ethnicities in this book. I mean, apart from, I think, one or two characters, I think she refers to them being white, but that's it. Because the way her describing him being white, because there's one woman who, I'm not going to tell you who it is because obviously it's spoilers, but who has like this massive brown wart on the end, right on the tip of her nose, with hair coming out of it, and it's described how dark it is compared to the paleness of her skin, like that. So it's not, out and out saying these are the specific ethnicities and such. And then seeing the children's drawings and how they have interpreted her world in all different spectrums of color and also clothing, because I love, like, there are these two drawings from two different children from two different cultures and countries, and one is it depicts a black woman in kind of African materials, colors and patterns and such, and then another one where it shows this woman, a different character, but they're associated with each other, who is dressed like a Tudor queen. And I just loved that. I loved seeing that. It was so stunning to see how children interpret words. That was a joy in the process of reading this book. I have to say that obviously, compared to Harry Potter, because they are completely different texts, they're completely different stories, completely different. So obviously, with Harry Potter, she was able to spread out 7 years across 7 books, like thousands of pages. She's crammed about 7 years and 280 pages in this book. Very different. So if I had to rank all of her books, I think Ickabog would be in last, but that is just because it's a very, very different age group than myself. And the thing is that she has less time to cover a load of stuff. And as I said, as an adult looking at it, it feels quite, in a way, juvenile. But it is a really young children's book at the end of the day. It is what it is. So of course, like her crime novels and such, I'm going to rank them higher than I do a fairy story that she's written. It's naturally going to happen. So I think out of all of her books, I think this is probably my least favourite, but I still absolutely loved it. So there we go. I also want to give a shout out for all of her messages that she has in this book. There are multiple, just as she has in all of her stories. But there were little things that I loved, like, for example, no spoiler here, but I just have to explain a little thing. So one of the characters that is overweight as a child, and he is picked on, he's teased, he's ridiculed for his weight, which is awful. And later on in the book, one of the people who shamed him as a child he's reunited with. And rather than going, oh, you treated me like crap when I was a kid, so I'm going to treat you like crap. No, he sees them as a person. He sees that they're in pain. He sees that they need help. And he instantly puts an arm around them and says, look, I'm going to help you. It's things like that, moments like that, which are so important to show to children. And things like how she's so honest about people being murdered, people being corrupted, people being manipulated, and politicians trying to get away with stuff and ridicule and destroy the poor for money. it was very, very interesting knowing, what we know about JK and her upbringing and everything. Reading this, it's like, wow, I can see what she's talking about there. I understand life events that she has been through or that she has seen in society since she first wrote this story, and obviously because obviously she needed to finish it for the publication. She has brought that in, and you can see it. You really, really can, and even to the degree, like at one point, Daisy Dovetail has to move house, and she lives next to a graveyard, which happened to Jackie. She lived next to a graveyard for a while. I just find it fascinating, how she's woven that into this story, into this fairy story, but yet made it completely relatable for everything that has gone on in our world for quite some time, and letting children see, we can change this, we can make things better for these people. And it starts with sometimes just saying no, and this is what it can do. I applaud her for publishing this, and especially since it was written at a very different time than now. When she's just literally picked it up, she swapped some things out and she's finished it, but the bulk of it is exactly how she wrote it many years ago. I applaud her for doing that. Because some authors may not have wanted to do that. Some authors would have gone, no, I'm not going there. That's something I wrote ages ago. That's irrelevant. But she's looked at it. She's gone, actually, this is important, and she's published it. So well done, JK. I'm very, very happy that you did that. I'm going to do a reading first. Can I just say also, I love the cover. It's so gorgeous. It's got the same on the back, the hardcover. This, when you've read the story, you know what this means, and I'm really happy at this, because when I first looked at it, I was like, what the heck is that? I don't understand what that is. Now I do, and I love it. So yeah, and and I do like also how she's very much making it clear how history can repeat itself, and most likely it will repeat itself at some point. But we have to be open-minded. We have to learn from the past in order to have a good future going forward. So I really love that message as well. So I'm going to read a chapter to you. Just FYI, her chapters are only like maximum. I think there was one that was about 5 pages long, but that was a really important chapter near the end of the book. So they're usually about 3. So this one is actually 2.5 pages. And it's chapter 2, and it's explaining the Ickabog. So here we go. The legend of the Ickabog has been passed down by generations of marshlanders and spread by word of mouth all the way to Shoeville. Nowadays, everybody knew the story. Naturally, as with all legends, it changed a little depending on who was telling it. However, every story agreed that a monster lived at the very northernmost tip of the country, in a wide patch of dark and often misty marsh too dangerous for humans to enter. The monster was said to eat children and sheep. Sometimes it even carried off grown men and women who strayed too close to the marsh at night. The habits and appearance of the Ickabog changed depending on who was describing it. Some made it snake-like, others dragonish or wolf-like. Some said it roared, others that it hissed, and still others said that it drifted as silently as the mist that descended on the marsh without warning. The Ickabog, they said, had extraordinary powers. It could imitate the human voice to lure travellers into its clutches. If you tried to kill it, it would mend magic. Sorry, massive planes going over my house. Perfect timing. Okay, there we go. If you tried to kill it, it would mend magically, or else split into 2 Ickabogs. It could fly, spurt fire, shoot poison. The Ickabog's powers were as great as the imagination of the teller. Mind you don't leave the garden while I'm working, parents all over the kingdom would tell their children, or the Ickabog will catch you and eat you all up. And throughout the land, boys and girls played at fighting the Ickabog, tried to frighten each other with the tail of the Ickabog, and even, if the story became too convincing, had nightmares about the Ickabog. Bert Beamish was one such little boy. When a family called the Dovetails came over for dinner one night, Mr. Dovetail entertained everyone with what he claimed was the latest news of the Ickabog. That night, 5-year-old Bert woke, sobbing and terrified from a dream in which the monster's huge white eyes were gleaming at him across a foggy marsh into which he was slowly sinking. There, there, whispered his mother, who tiptoed into the room with a candle and now rocked him backwards and forwards in her lap. There's no Ickabog, Bertie, it's just a silly story. But Mr. Dovetail said sheep have gone missing, hiccuped Bert. So they have, said Mrs. Beamish, but not because a monster took them. Sheep are foolish creatures, they wander off and get lost in the marsh. But Mr. Dovetail said people disappear too. Only people who were silly enough to stray onto the marsh at night, said Mrs. Beamish. Hush now, Bertie, there's no monster. But Mr. Dovetail said people heard voices outside their windows, and in the morning the chickens are gone. Mrs. Beamish couldn't help but laugh. The voices they heard are ordinary thieves, Bertie. Up in the marshland they pilfer for each other all the time. It's easier to blame Ickabog than to admit that their neighbours are stealing from them. Stealing? Gasped Bert, sitting up on his mother's lap and gazing at her with solemn eyes. Stealing's very naughty, isn't it, Mummy? It's very naughty indeed, said Mrs. Beamish, lifting up Bert, placing him tenderly back into his warm bed and tucking him in. But luckily we don't live near those lawless marshlanders. She picked up her candle and tiptoed back towards the bedroom door. Night-night, she whispered from the doorway. She'd normally have added, don't let the Ickabog bite, which was what parents across Cornucopia said to their children at bedtime. But instead she said, sleep tight. Bert fell asleep again and saw no more monsters in his dreams. It so happened that Mr. Dovetail and Mrs. Beamish were great friends. They'd been in the same class at school and had known each other all of their lives. When Mr. Dovetail heard that he'd given Bert nightmares, he felt guilty. As he was the best carpenter in all of Shoeville, he decided to carve the little boy an Ickabog. It had a wide, smiling mouth full of teeth and big, clawed feet, and at once it became Bert's favourite toy. If Bert or his parents or the Dovetails next door or anyone else in the whole kingdom of Cornucopia had been told that terrible troubles were about to engulf Cornucopia, all because of the myth of the Ickabog, they'd have laughed. They lived in the happiest kingdom in the world. So what harm could the Ickabog do? So as you can see, everything is pretty good in Cornucopia until something gets told about the Ickabog that sends everything spiraling. And it's so interesting when you think about compared to history, compared to what J.K. would do in Harry Potter and everything, how they kind of linked. Because in case you aren't aware, in Harry Potter, the Death Eaters, Voldemort's army and such, is actually a way of J.K. kind of telling the history, as it were, of Nazis, and so she wanted to have that kind of link, as it were. And in a way, the Ickabog does the same. The prejudice against the Ickabog and various people in society that takes place, it's really interesting how she tells it. It's very interesting how she shows the truth to the children, and she's not afraid to go to dark places, just as she wasn't afraid to go to dark places with Harry Potter. She tells the truth, and it's very, very interesting, and I enjoyed every single minute of reading it. Now, of course, this only came out about nearly a year ago, is with the published copy. So there hasn't been an adaptation of it. I'd love to see an adaptation of it. I think it would be like a really good thing to like put over like Christmas or something. I don't know if there's been any bids to make an adaptation of it. There is an audiobook that's read by Stephen Fry. He read all the Harry Potter books. I love those audio books. He is so good at doing audiobooks of JK's work. So I'm just, cause I only finished it yesterday. I haven't got the audiobook yet. I'm going to, because I've got my new Audible credit. It'll be due to be with me next week. So I'm going to get it with my Audible credit. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'll put a link to it in the description below should you be interested. But overall, I found it enchanting. It was charming. It was witty. It was dark. I loved the growth of characters. I loved the way she told the story. And even though it's my least favourite because of how, in a way, juvenile the text is compared to her other books, I still absolutely loved it. So those are my thoughts on the Ickabog by J.K. Rowling. So would I read this again? Yes, certainly. I will definitely read this again. I enjoyed it so much. Would I read more of JK's work? Well, what do you think? I absolutely love her books, so yes. Would I recommend this to anyone? Absolutely yes. I would let them know how the text is in a way, because it's written for young children. It's quite, in a way, juvenile, but obviously it's up to the adult if they want to read it and such. So, but definitely for kids, it's a really great story. So those are my thoughts on the Ickabog by J.K. Rowling. Have you read this book? I'd love to know what you think. Leave me a comment in the comments box below. Leave me a thumbs up, thumbs down. Entirely up to you. I'll let you decide. And I'll be back with my thoughts on my next read, which I've already announced, which is Sourdough by Robin Sloane. I've not read any of Robin's books before, so I'm quite intrigued by this, and we'll see how it goes. So then, I'll be back with my thoughts on Sourdough as soon as I'm done. Alright guys, bye!